How Ross Martin was quietly pushed aside to protect Robert Conrad's fame reveals the hidden struggles behind the Wild Wild West. While Conrad's star shined bright, Martin's talent and health battles were quietly pushed to the side. This is the untold story of sacrifice and rivalry in Hollywood's spotlight. When you think of the Wild Wild West, you probably picture two charming heroes riding into danger, James West and Artemus Gordon, a dynamic duo who mixed action with clever gadgets long before spy shows became a thing. But beneath that polished surface, something darker was happening. What if I told you that behind the scenes, one of those stars was quietly sacrificed to protect the other's shining image? This isn't just a tale about a TV show. It's about power, rivalry, and the brutal realities of Hollywood's golden age. Ross Martin, the brilliant actor who brought Artemus Gordon to life, wasn't just a sidekick. His talent and charisma made him a favorite among fans, and his character was essential to the show's success. Yet, over time, whispers began to spread. The relationship between Martin and his co-star, Robert Conrad, who played James West, was far from friendly. Rumors circulated that tensions on set ran deep, but the studio never let the public see that side of things. Instead, they carefully crafted a narrative where Conrad was the untouchable star, the perfect leading man, while Martin's role diminished quietly. This isn't your typical Hollywood rivalry story. It's more complex, tied to health struggles, studio politics, and the harsh decisions made behind closed doors. Martin was fighting his own battles, both professional and personal, and it seemed like the powers that be weren't interested in protecting him. Instead, they made sure Conrad's image stayed spotless, even if it meant sidelining a talented actor whose contribution deserved more respect. So why was Ross Martin sacrificed? And what does that say about the way fame works, especially when it's carefully controlled by studios with their own agendas? We'll dive into the facts, the rumors, and the untold stories that reveal a side of the Wild Wild West you've never seen before. It's a story about loyalty, betrayal, and the hidden costs of keeping a star's reputation intact. Ross Martin wasn't your typical TV co-star. Far from it. When he stepped into the role of Artemus Gordon on the Wild Wild West, he brought a unique blend of charm, wit, and undeniable skill that made the character unforgettable. Artemus wasn't just a gadget guy or comic relief, he was a master of disguise, a clever mind who often saved the day in ways James West couldn't. Fans loved Martin's performance because he wasn't just playing a part, he was elevating the entire show. Martin's background was as intriguing as his role. Born in Poland and raised in New York City, he studied acting intensely and brought a sophisticated flair to everything he did. His range wasn't limited to TV, he had a rich theater history and could easily slip between drama and comedy. But despite his talent, Martin often found himself overshadowed in the eyes of the industry. On the Wild Wild West, he was the perfect foil for Conrad's rugged hero, but never quite the star. What made Martin's work so captivating was how he injected life into Artemus Gordon. He wasn't just a partner, he was the brains behind many of the show's clever twists. Whether it was blending into a crowd or inventing a device to outsmart the villains, Martin's character was essential. His performances had a magnetic quality that pulled viewers in, making his absence in later episodes all the more noticeable. But as much as fans loved him, there were signs that things were not smooth behind the scenes. Martin reportedly clashed with some of the production staff and, more notably, with Robert Conrad himself. Those tensions never spilled into the public eye, but they simmered under the surface. Martin's presence on the show began to feel more precarious, especially as the studio grew increasingly protective of Conrad's image. There's a common thread here. Ross Martin was immensely talented, yet he wasn't treated as an equal star. His contributions were vital, but he was positioned more as a sidekick, a secondary player who could be sacrificed if it helped the bigger picture. For a man who poured so much into his craft, that must have been a bitter pill to swallow. Up next, we'll look closer at Robert Conrad, the man whose image became so important to protect that it might have cost Ross Martin dearly. The story isn't just about rivalry. It's about the harsh realities of fame and how one actor's rise can sometimes mean another's fall. What happened between these two men behind the cameras will shock you, and it explains a lot about how the industry really works. Robert Conrad wasn't just a star. He was the kind of actor studios loved to build their empires around. Rugged, charismatic, and undeniably marketable, Conrad fit the mold of the ideal leading man during the 1960s. His role as James West in the Wild Wild West was tailor-made to showcase his charm and physicality. While Martin brought brains and flair, Conrad was the muscle and face of the show. the hero audiences were meant to root for. What's less talked about is how aggressively studios protected Conrad's image. In an era when stars were carefully managed, any hint of scandal or weakness could derail a career. Conrad's on-screen persona was that of a tough, confident man who never lost control. Behind the scenes, the studio worked hard to maintain that perception, sometimes at the expense of others. This wasn't unusual for the time, but it set the stage for tensions that would later explode. Conrad himself was known to be demanding and fiercely protective of his spotlight. Some insiders whispered about clashes with cast and crew, though few details ever leaked. What's clear is that when it came to keeping his image intact, Conrad and the studio were a team, one that prioritized public perception over private truths. That meant any potential threat to his status, whether from co-stars or outside forces, had to be dealt with swiftly and quietly. This protection wasn't just about vanity. It was a business strategy. Conrad's star power drove ratings and revenue. Keeping him untarnished was crucial for the show's success. And in that high-stakes environment, people like Ross Martin, no matter how talented, could become collateral damage. But there was more to the story than just studio politics and ego. The tensions between Martin and Conrad ran deep and were about more than just image. They touched on jealousy, control, and fear. What unfolded on set wasn't just friendly competition. It was a battle for survival in a cutthroat industry. And the fallout from that battle would shape the careers and lives of both men. Next, we'll dig into those behind-the-scenes tensions, what really happened between Ross Martin and Robert Conrad when the cameras weren't rolling. The story gets even more intense, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. The magic of the Wild Wild West masked a more volatile reality between its two leads. Ross Martin and Robert Conrad were supposed to be a team, partners facing villains and saving the day together. But behind the cameras, their relationship was anything but cooperative. Tensions simmered early on, and rumors suggest they often clashed over everything from creative decisions to personal behavior. Martin, with his deep theater background and disciplined approach to acting, reportedly found Conrad's style and attitude frustrating. Conrad was known for his confident, sometimes brash personality. He liked to take charge and was said to be difficult with co-stars who challenged him. On the other side, Martin wasn't someone to back down easily. His wit and intelligence made him a force to reckon with in any conversation. Some insiders say these clashes weren't just personality conflicts, but reflected deeper power struggles. Conrad was the studio's chosen star, the face they wanted to promote, while Martin was seen as talented but expendable. This imbalance created an atmosphere where Martin often felt sidelined, and tensions escalated into open hostility at times. Behind the scenes, small incidents reportedly blew up into bigger confrontations. Whether it was arguments over screen time, disagreements on character portrayal, or even personal jabs, the friction grew. Yet the studio kept all this under wraps, fearing any hint of discord could damage the show's image. What's especially striking is how this tension seemed to influence the narrative around the show's cast. Over time, Martin's role was diminished, and his presence on the show felt less vital. Some believe this was a deliberate move to protect Conrad's image as the untouchable hero, a decision that came at Martin's expense. And there was another factor adding pressure: Martin's health. As he battled the early stages of multiple sclerosis, his physical struggles may have made him appear less reliable in the eyes of producers. This vulnerability, combined with his clashes with Conrad, painted a perfect storm. But this wasn't just a story about rivalry. It was about how power works in Hollywood. When one star is protected at all costs, others can be pushed aside, even if it means losing valuable talent. The personal becomes political, and the consequences can be devastating. Next, we'll explore the role the studio played in all this, the unseen hand guiding the narrative and making decisions that affected not just careers but lives. What went on behind those glossy marketing campaigns might shock you. Behind every hit show in Hollywood's golden age, there was a powerful studio pulling the strings, deciding who shined and who faded into the shadows. For the Wild Wild West, the studio had one clear priority: protect Robert Conrad's image as the untouchable leading man. And when you consider the ruthless nature of the industry back then, it's not surprising they would go to extreme lengths to keep that image pristine. Studios back then didn't just produce shows, they managed stars like carefully crafted products. Any misstep, whether a personal scandal or even an actor's perceived weakness, could be seen as a threat to the entire brand. So the studio worked behind the scenes, shaping public perception through tight control of media appearances, interviews, and even scripts. Ross Martin, despite his undeniable talent and fan admiration, was a variable the studio couldn't fully control. His growing health problems and outspoken personality made him a risk in their eyes. The more Martin pushed against the limits, the more the studio saw him as a liability, especially when Conrad was their golden boy, whose image had to remain flawless to ensure continued success. Sources close to the production hint at deliberate decisions to minimize Martin's role in later seasons, quietly edging him out while keeping the focus on Conrad. Whether it was reducing Martin's screen time, limiting his involvement in publicity, or ignoring his creative input, the signs pointed to a clear agenda: keep the star safe, even if it meant sacrificing a valued co-star. This wasn't just business, it was calculated damage control. The studio's loyalty was to the brand, not the individual actors. And when Ross Martin's health began to decline, it provided a convenient reason to justify sidelining him without raising public suspicion. What's more, these moves were shrouded in secrecy. Fans and media at the time saw only the polished final product, unaware of the personal costs behind the scenes. This carefully maintained illusion kept Conrad's reputation intact but left Martin's story largely untold. We'll look at the impact Martin's health had, not just on his career but on the entire dynamic of the show. How did his struggles affect the studio's decisions, and what price did he pay for being honest about his condition in an unforgiving industry? Ross Martin's decline was gradual but heartbreaking. Behind the scenes of the Wild Wild West, he was quietly fighting multiple sclerosis, a debilitating condition that slowly robbed him of his strength and mobility. For someone whose role demanded physical agility and quick thinking, this was devastating. Yet Martin kept pushing forward, hiding much of his pain from fans and colleagues alike. This wasn't just a personal battle. It became a professional liability in an industry that prized stamina and perfection. Unlike today, where health struggles are often met with sympathy, back then admitting weakness was a risk. For Martin, the pressure to appear strong was immense, especially when his co-star and the studio were focused on preserving Robert Conrad's untarnished image. Martin's condition began to affect his work on the show. There were days when filming was physically grueling and his energy lagged. The studio noticed and used it as justification to reduce his screen time, framing it as a practical decision. But behind the scenes, it was clear that Martin's health became a convenient reason to sideline him, protecting Conrad's star status. What made this even more painful was how isolated Martin became. The industry wasn't equipped to support actors with serious health issues, and his rumored tensions with Conrad only worsened his situation. Instead of receiving understanding, Martin faced increasing marginalization. Still, Martin's professionalism shone through. He continued to deliver memorable performances, determined not to let his condition define him. But the sacrifices he made were immense, and the strain on his mental and emotional well-being must have been tremendous. This hidden struggle adds a tragic layer to the story of the Wild Wild West. It wasn't just about power and rivalry. It was about a man fighting against his own body while the machine around him chose to move on without him. Next, we'll dive into the sacrifice theory, the idea that Martin was deliberately pushed out to protect Conrad's image. The rumors and fan theories surrounding this are chilling and reveal just how ruthless Hollywood can be. Among fans and insiders, one of the darkest whispers is that Ross Martin was deliberately sacrificed to save Robert Conrad's image. This theory isn't just speculation. It's built on pieces of truth, rumors, and unsettling patterns that paint a picture of a ruthless industry willing to discard anyone standing in the way of its chosen star. Martin's diminishing role on the Wild Wild West wasn't just about his health. It coincided suspiciously with a surge in efforts to promote Conrad as the sole leading man. Screen time was reallocated, Martin's input was sidelined, and the chemistry that once made the show special began to fray. Many who watched the show closely noticed a shift. Artemus Gordon wasn't the same integral partner anymore. He felt more like an afterthought. Some insiders have hinted that Martin's outspoken nature, combined with his declining health, made him a target. In an environment where image is everything, the studio allegedly made a cold calculation: keep the golden boy safe, and if that means pushing Martin out, so be it. This move protected Conrad's clean image, but at a high human cost. What's more troubling are the stories about how this push-out was handled. Rather than an open conversation or support, Martin was reportedly frozen out of creative decisions and left to battle his illness largely alone. The public narrative framed his absence as a natural consequence of his condition, but those close to the production suspect something far more deliberate. The sacrifice theory also ties into broader Hollywood practices at the time, how studios controlled narratives, manipulated public perception, and discarded those who no longer fit their ideal image. Martin's story became an example of the system's cold efficiency, where loyalty was a luxury and the spotlight unforgiving. Despite these dark realities, Martin's legacy endures. Fans who remember his work see beyond the studio's narrative. They honor the man who gave so much to his craft, even when the odds were stacked against him. His sacrifice reminds us that behind every star's glow, there can be shadows few want to acknowledge. Next, we'll examine the aftermath, what happened to Ross Martin after the Wild Wild West, how his life unfolded, and what the lasting impact of this sacrifice was. Once the Wild Wild West ended, Ross Martin's career never quite regained its former momentum. The very health struggles that had begun to weigh on him during the show only worsened, and his opportunities dwindled. Unlike Robert Conrad, who continued to land roles and maintain his public presence, Martin slowly faded from the spotlight. His battle with multiple sclerosis intensified, limiting his ability to take on demanding roles. The industry, notorious for its unforgiving pace, wasn't kind to an actor facing such challenges, especially one who had already been quietly sidelined. Martin's condition made him increasingly dependent on others, and his once brilliant career became a painful memory rather than a continuing success story. What makes this even more tragic is that Martin's decline happened with very little fanfare or public sympathy. The carefully managed image of the era meant the press rarely touched on his health, and the studio's silence only deepened the sense that he'd been abandoned. For someone who had given so much to a beloved show, the lack of recognition in his later years feels especially cruel. Despite all this, Martin's legacy lives on through his performances and the deep appreciation of dedicated fans. They remember not just the character Artemus Gordon, but the man who brought him to life with wit, heart, and undeniable talent. His struggles remind us of the human cost behind the polished images on screen. In the end, Ross Martin's story is a stark reminder of how fragile fame can be and how easily the spotlight can shift. What happened to him wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a reflection of an industry that often values image over humanity. Next, we'll take a closer look at Robert Conrad's career after the show and how his carefully protected image continued to shape his path, sometimes at great cost to those around him. After the Wild Wild West wrapped up, Robert Conrad's star continued to rise, solidifying his place as one of Hollywood's tough guy icons. His image as the fearless, all-American hero was carefully maintained, and studios continued to build projects around that persona. Whether starring in action-packed TV series or films, Conrad's brand remained consistent, rugged, confident, and unshakable. This polished image came at a cost, though. The very control that protected Conrad's reputation also created barriers around him. Reports suggest he was notoriously protective of his privacy and could be difficult to work with, especially if anyone threatened that spotless public facade. The industry rewarded him for maintaining that image, but it also fed rumors of tension with colleagues and resistance to change. Conrad's career flourished, but the shadow of his time with Ross Martin lingered quietly beneath the surface. Some fans and insiders have speculated that the tensions from the Wild Wild West influenced how Conrad managed relationships on future projects, always cautious to keep control and avoid the kind of conflicts that could threaten his status. While Conrad enjoyed continued success, the story of what happened with Martin remained largely untold, hidden behind the gleaming star power and promotional campaigns. His image stayed clean, but it came from a system that often demanded sacrifice, sometimes in ways that audiences would never see. And finally, we'll reflect on what this story means today, the lessons from Ross Martin's sacrifice, and how Hollywood's approach to stardom has evolved. What can we learn from this hidden chapter? And how does it still resonate in the entertainment world? Ross Martin's journey is more than just a tale of one actor's rise and fall. It's a mirror reflecting the harsh realities of Hollywood's star system, especially during its golden era. His story reveals how fame isn't always about talent or hard work. Sometimes, it's about politics, image control, and ruthless decisions made behind closed doors. Martin's sacrifice to protect Robert Conrad's image exposes a darker side of the entertainment industry, where loyalty is fragile and careers can be shaped or shattered by forces far beyond the actors themselves. His health struggles, sidelining, and eventual fade from the spotlight show how human vulnerability is often overlooked in favor of maintaining a marketable brand. Yet, there's a bittersweet legacy here. Martin's fans continue to celebrate his artistry and the depth he brought to Artemus Gordon. His influence lives on in how complex, intelligent sidekicks are portrayed today, characters who aren't just accessories but vital, compelling parts of the story. The industry itself has evolved, becoming more transparent and supportive of actors facing health or personal challenges. While it's not perfect, today's actors have more power and protection than Martin did. Discussions about mental health, disabilities, and workplace fairness are now part of mainstream conversation, partly because stories like his force the industry to reckon with its past. At its core, Martin's story challenges us to look beyond a glamorous surface and question what sacrificed to create the entertainment we love. It reminds us that behind every shining star is a web of stories, some celebrated, others hidden, that deserve to be heard. Ross Martin wasn't just a co-star or a casualty. He was a gifted artist whose struggles and sacrifices helped shape a classic show and, in turn, Hollywood history. Remembering him means honoring the complexity of fame and the cost it sometimes demands. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.